It's a pleasant moment to meet you, great hosts. Welcome to the discussion on History Paper 1 for the May-June examinations. All right. We understand that the May-June examination for 2026, which has just been recently written, we are going to go through the discussion of the paper, and also we are going to elaborate on the possible responses to the given questions in the paper, and also try to explain how best we can approach the questions for the sake of preparing those who are yet to write. Right, so that is our paper, History Paper 1, May-June examinations. As usual, our paper is a paper out of 150 marks with 3 source-based questions and 3 essay questions from those given options. For the sake of the discussion, we're going to go through the whole paper. Right, but as learners in the examinations, as candidates, we understand we are supposed to answer only 3 questions out of the 6. Which might come in the form of 2 source-based questions and 1 essay question, or you can answer 2 essay questions and 1 source-based question. Right, we take it to the first question. Our focus of the question number 1, we understand, is the origins of Cold War. It says, how did the North Atlantic Treaty and the Warsaw Pact intensify the Cold War between the USA and the Soviet Union in the 1940s and the 1950s. We want to look at how the formation of the opposing military organizations led to the intensification of Cold War tensions between the 2 superpowers at the extreme of the USA and at the side of the USSR. Right. So we understand that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was for the capitalist side, and the Warsaw Pact was for the communist side. Those were opposing military organizations. Right. Let's go to our questions. Our first question is saying, how according to the source, did the use of veto in the Security Council by Russia affected the United Nations? How did the use of veto in Security Council by Russia affected the United Nations? Right. This is a level 1 question, which is an extraction question. We're supposed to get our response directly from the addendum as it is. Right. We're going to look at source 1A. Source 1A, it says, it has been taken from an article, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, by Lieutenant N. Wagner, and it was published in the Censure Militia in 1978. It gives reasons for the formation of North Atlantic Treaty in 1949. Right. If we check there, the first part, that is where we extract our answer. Our first part is saying the indiscriminate or unselective use of the veto in Security Council of the United Nations by Russia, ostensibly or apparently to further her own ends, resulted in the inability of this organization to resolve conflicts. We are saying the UN was now unable to resulted in the inability of this organization to resolve conflicts. Why? Because of the veto powers. The veto powers, we are saying, that is the power to refuse or to reject an official suggestion or an official proposal. So it means the UN was now having inability to resolve conflicts. And number 2, to institute adequate arms control. So those are our 2 responses for the first question. The first response, we are saying it resulted in inability to resolve conflicts and it also institute adequate adequate arms control. Those were the limitations that were brought by the veto powers that were rested at the disposal of the USSR. The UN could not resolve conflicts and also could not institute adequate arms control. Question number 1.1.2, it says define the term veto in your own words. And when we are defining veto in our own words, we can define this as the constitutional right. The constitutional right to reject a decision or proposal. A decision or a proposal made by a lawmaking body. A lawmaking body. Right, that's a veto. So when we're looking at the term veto, we are saying this is the constitutional right to reject a decision or to reject a proposal that is made by a lawmaking body. So in this instance, we are saying the United Nations could not effectively institute conflict resolution because Russia had got veto rights in the Security Council of the UN. It would reject some of the proposals or it will reject the decisions because of the veto powers vested in it according to the Constitution. That is veto. Right, we look at number 113. According to the source, why did the Soviet Union introduce communiform? We look at the Soviet Union introducing communiform. Right. It says, starting from here, in addition to this, the Soviet rejection of the American initiated Marshall Aid Plan in June 1947, and the enforced compliance with this policy by its satellite states led to the West's suspicions being well-founded, especially after the Soviet introduction of the communiform, its own answer to the Marshall Plan. Right. So the question says, why did the USSR, according to the source, why did the Soviet Union introduce the communiform? So the communiform was introduced in this instance as an answer to the Marshall Plan. It was a counter-action to the actions that were taken by the Allied powers. When the Allied powers took an action to introduce the Marshall Plan, the Russians, they also retaliated by introducing the communiform as a solution to their own problems in their communist zone. So we can safely, in this dimension, say that the communiform was introduced as an answer to the Marshall Plan. They also did their own solution as to solving their own economic problems, though they were not financially capable. But they did an initiative to counter the Marshall Plan by introducing the communiform, which served the same purpose as the Marshall Plan. Right. Number 114 says, using the information in the source and your own knowledge, explain why the idea of a defensive alliance among Western nations was initially suggested by Churchill in 1946. Why did Marshall suggest the idea of a defensive alliance? Right. We're going to look at the source and find the reason why Winston Churchill opted for the idea of a defensive alliance. Right. If you look at our source, we can see that it talks about Churchill in the second statement of the last paragraph, where it says the idea of a defensive alliance amongst the nations of the West within the framework of the United Nations was initially suggested by Churchill in 1946, and taken up a year later by Louis St. Laurent, Canadian Secretary of State for External Affairs. The more concrete form of a proposal for a type of Western Union was put forward by Mr. Ernest Bevin in a speech in the House of Commons in January 1948. He mentioned the Dunkirk Treaty of March 1947, wherein a firm basis had been laid for mutual assistance between France and Britain, primarily for the protection against a resurgent rising Germany. Right. So if we can check from those ideas that are presented there, we can figure out that the reason that was there was for a need for mutual assistance. There was need for mutual assistance and for protection. So the need for forming a defensive alliance, if we were to look at it from an open perspective, we are saying the idea of a defensive military alliance amongst the Western nations, it was suggested for the sake of the need for mutual assistance. In case of attack. What it meant here is these countries, they needed to have mutual assistance to assist each other in times of difficulty. Now there was a threat of communism and they felt threatened by communist countries. In any event, a communist country had the capability of attacking on any one of the Western powers. So the need for a defense force or a defensive alliance was that if any one country within the alliance is attacked, it means an attack on all, and they will assist each other. That is mutual assistance in case of an attack or an aggression from the communist world. Right. We go to question number 1.2. Explain the symbolic representation of the following. Right, we are looking at source 1B. Source 1B is our cartoon heading for the topping out ceremony and was drawn by German cartoonist Wuss and appeared in the German newspaper Mannheimer Morgen on 24 March 1949. It illustrates the role of the US in establishing a defense alliance amongst the Western countries. From left, we have Dean Axon, who is the US Secretary of State. We have Ernest Bevin, who is the British Foreign Secretary, and we have Robert Schuman, who is the French Foreign Minister. Right, so our first question, as you can see there, we are seeing Dean Axon being the builder of the wall. And we are seeing Ernest Bevin and Robert Schuman appearing as assistants to Dean Axon. Right. So our question is saying, explain the symbolic representation of those following in the cartoon. Right. So if you're looking at Dean Axon, we're saying he's a representative of the USA. So if you are seeing also there, he's the one who is doing the construction of the wall. So we are looking at USA's leading role in establishing a defense alliance. Among the Western countries. So Dean Axon basically is representing the USA's leading role in establishing a defense alliance. And then if you look at countries whose bricks have been used to construct the wall, if you check there, we can see that USA, England, there's Netherlands, there's Belgium, there's Luxembourg, there's Canada, all those countries. Their bricks have been used to build the wall. What is the symbolic representation of that? It means there that those countries, they are in one dimension, they are fully supporting members of the Defense Alliance. And fully supporting members who had actually joined the alliance. Their bricks have been used. So the implication is they have ultimately joined in building a defense alliance, which is the wall. So they are fully supporting, and their commitment was shown by them having joined the defense alliance. Then, if you also look at countries whose bricks have not been used in the construction of the wall, if you check, we see that there are some countries whose bricks are still lying here, the likes of Ireland, Portugal, Denmark, Italy, Norway. Right. What's the implication of these countries here? What it implies there is those are countries who were yet to join the alliance. Countries supporting the decision So if you look at those countries, these are countries who are supporting the alliance idea, but who were yet to join. They haven't joined yet, but they were on the way of getting to become members. So we are seeing them having their bricks not yet being used on the construction of the wall, but the bricks are just laid close to the wall, which means they are on the way to be used in the construction of the wall, which implies that they are on their way to be part of the defense alliance. Right. Moving on to the next part. The next part, we are going to look at question number 1.2.2, using the source and your own knowledge, explain the significance of both Ernest Bevin and Robert Schuman in the cartoon. We are seeing those two guys, they are representing their two countries, which is the British and the French. What is the significance of both of them being shown there? Right, the significance there of the two of them being shown there is to show the unity that existed between those countries. Britain and France, they were united in support of America, or we can say they are there to show the support given to USA in the formation of the Defense Alliance. They are there to give support to the USA as colleagues to, or as allies to, the decision of the Defense Alliance. Or we can also look at, shows the commitment to the idea of the Defense Alliance. So some of those ideas, that is what you can use. You can say that it shows unity, and basically they were united for the sake of the success of the Defense Alliance. Or you can also look at, it was support, which is shown there because they are assisting the USA to construct the Defense Alliance, which is the wall. And also we can also look at it from the sake of commitment. They are committed to do the task to ensure that they are safely protected from any invasion from the communist side. Right, then number 1.3 says, study source 1A and 1B. Explain how the information in source 1A supports the evidence in source 1B regarding the formation of a defense alliance. Right, here we understand we use a format of comparison where we say source 1A says this, and this is supported by source 1B, which shows something else. Our source 1B, remember, is a visual source, so it shows. Right, so I'm going to make comparisons which are direct, but as you are comparing for the learners who are to write the examinations, make sure you use the format which is correct. Source 1A says this, and this is supported by source 1B, which says this, which shows this in this instance. And make sure that you do not copy the sources, do not copy the ideas as they are, but do not copy the words of the source. Get the idea from the source and express how the same idea is portrayed in the visual source. So I will use this format for the sake of discussion. This is my source 1A, and I will compare it to source 1B. Right. I will pick an idea from source 1A and show how the same idea is portrayed in the other source. Right. Like for example, source 1A talks about mutual assistance between France and Britain. That is my information from source 1A, and that information is supported by source 1B, which is portrayed by Bevin and Cuban. Working together. That is the same idea how it's portrayed. It talks about mutual assistance, meaning to say is joint assistance. You assist each other either way between Britain and France. And we are seeing Bevin for Britain and Cuban for France working together. That shows that there is mutual assistance there. Right, and also we can look at the other idea that we can also portray in the two sources. Right, it talks about idea of a defense alliance. In source 1A, they talk about the idea of a defense alliance. A defense alliance is supposed to be formed. And in source 1B, it shows countries that were members of the alliance and those who were yet to join. You see how those ideas are interlinked. They are talking about the idea of a defense alliance in the first source, and in the second source, they are showing countries which are supporting the idea of a defense alliance and countries who are yet to be part of the defense alliance. So basically, that is how you compare your sources. Or also, if you want to get deeper there, you can also find other comparisons. Like, for example, there is also a comparison which talks about the Canadian Secretary of State who took up the decision from the initial decision. And it also portrayed by Canada as being shown as one of the members of the countries. Like we are saying here, it talks about, in source 1A, it talks about the initial idea of forming the defense alliance. It was taken and put forward by Mr. Louis Laurent, who is a Canadian Secretary of State. We are saying the initial idea was done by Winston Churchill, but a year later, it was put into action by Canadian Secretary of State. And also we are seeing Canada being one of the members here, which is portrayed on the members which are to be part of the Defense Alliance. So it's supporting either way. Canadian Secretary taking up the idea and also Canada participating as a member of the Defense Alliance. Right, we move on to the next question. Next question is question number 1.4. Question number 141, it says, name any two peaceful principles of the United Nations stated in the source that were binding to countries that signed the North Atlantic Treaty. Two peaceful principles, right? We have to go to the source and identify the peaceful principles. Right. We are now on source 1C. And the context of our source is there. Right. It says, this treaty is a single document. The nations who sign it agree to abide by peaceful principles of the United Nations. Right. What are the peaceful principles? To maintain friendly relations and economic cooperation with one another. That's one principle. The second principle, to consult together whenever the territory or independence of any of them is threatened. And lastly, to come to the aid of any one of them who may be attacked. Right. So if we check, those are our three possible responses. Number one, to maintain friendly relations and economic cooperation with one another. Number two, to consult together whenever the territorial independence of any of them is threatened. And then number three, to come to the aid of any one of them who may be attacked. Right. We move on to the next question. Quote from the source how the signatories of the North Atlantic Treaty undertook to abide by the provisions of the UN Charter. How did they undertake to be abided by the provisions of the UN Charter? Right. That is number 142. We check again, that is a level 1 in extraction question. Our answers are in the source. Right. If we look at our second paragraph, it talks about, through this treaty, we undertake to conduct our international affairs in accordance with the provisions of the UN Charter. We undertake to exercise our right of collective or individual self-defense against armed attack, with accordance to Article 51 of the Charter, and subject to such measures as Security Council may take to maintain and restore international peace and security. Right. So we are saying they will undertake to exercise their right of collective or individual self-defense against armed attack. That is in accordance to the UN Charter, Article number 51. And also subject to such measures as Security Council may maintain. A Security Council may take to maintain and restore international peace and security. And it continues to say, in this treaty, we seek to establish freedom from aggression and from the use of force in the North Atlantic Treaty. They seek to establish freedom from aggression and from the use of force in the North Atlantic Treaty. Right. So for the sake of our question is asking us to quote from the source how the signatories of the treaty will undertake to abide by the provisions of the UN Charter. Right. Explain the implication of the phrase, we seek to establish freedom from aggression in the context of signing the North Atlantic Treaty. We seek to establish freedom from aggression. Right. So what is the implication of that statement when they say we seek to establish freedom from aggression? In this instance, our aggression automatically comes from the Eastern powers, who are communist powers. They seek to establish the freedom from aggression. So what it implies there is countries that signed the treaty were prepared to defend each other. Unfortunately, this response is supposed to come at the top. Is from number 1.4.3. We are saying in this instance, the implication of the statement is that countries that signed the treaty were prepared to defend each other from forceful invasion by communists. That's the main idea there. If they say we seek to establish freedom from aggression, it means they are prepared to defend each other from forceful invasion by any communist country. Then number 1.4.4, what according to the source bound the countries represented in the North Atlantic Treaty together? What was a binding factor to the countries in the North Atlantic Treaty? Right. This is an extraction question. We can see our answer here. The nations represented here are bound together by, number 1, ties of long standing. They are bound together because of having a common heritage of democracy. And also, they are bound together by individual liberty and the rule of law. Those are their common principles. So they are bound together by having the common principles, the long-standing ties of long-standing. We are joined by common heritage of democracy. So it means those countries have got or are known by a common heritage of democracy. And on top of that, individual liberty. And rule of law. Those are their principles. And those is what help them remain together. They are bound together by those principles because they abide by those principles. Comment on the usefulness of the source for a historian researching the information of the North Atlantic Treaty. Right. The usefulness is that the source, it shows how member countries were to conduct themselves. The source gives us information about how the member countries of the North Atlantic Treaty were to conduct themselves for the success of the Defense Alliance. And also, if you check the source, it talks about the binding principles. The binding principles of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is also useful information. And also it talks about the influence, it gives us about the influence of NATO on world peace. All those are pieces of useful information from the sources. So we can safely say those are some of the pieces of usefulness that we can extract from the source. Right, we take it to the next question. It says, name according to the source any two founding members of the Warsaw Pact. Right, the members of the Warsaw Pact, there are many. We are going to look at them from the source and try to highlight the members. We are now at source 1D. Right, founding members included Soviet Union, Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. So N of those, the Soviet Union as the key member, we have Poland, we have East Germany, we have Czechoslovakia, we have Hungary, we have Romania, we have Bulgaria. Right. Explain the concept Marxism-Leninism. Right. These two gentlemen are communist ideologists. We look at Marxism, we are looking at Karl Marx. And you look at Leninism, we are looking at Vladimir Lenin. So a combination of the two, we understand that the backing of the ideas of communism, they were rooted in the ideas of Karl Marx in his writings, The Das Kapital. And also we are seeing Lenin coming in as the leader of the USSR and trying to adopt some of those ideas and mix them with his own understanding, which is what we call the interpretation of Marxism by Lenin, which became Marxism-Leninism. So when we're looking at that ideology, we are saying we can define this as the doctrine of Karl Marx. As interpreted and put into effect. In Soviet Union by Lenin. So it's the interpretation of Marxist ideologies by Lenin and how he implemented them in the Soviet Union. Or we can also look at the dimension from Mao Zedong of China. But specifically in this instance, we are looking at the ideas of Karl Marx as interpreted and effected by Vladimir Lenin. Comment on why East Germany was included in the Warsaw Pact. East Germany, why was it included in the Soviet, in the Warsaw Pact? Right. One of the obvious reasons is East Germany was under USSR control. So East Germany could easily be manipulated into the Warsaw Pact because it was controlled by USSR. And also, it was also there to mark significant extension of Soviet influence, of USSR influence in Central Europe. Right. It was also a way of showing the capitalist countries that it was possible to extend its influence even into Central Europe, not only in East Europe. So they wanted to show the capitalists that they can extend their influence into Central Europe. And initially, we were also seeing East Germany being under the influence of the USSR after the split of Germany into zones of occupation. Right, we take it to number 154. What, according to the source, was a direct consequence of the rearmament of West Germany when they joined NATO in 1955? What, according to the source? We can check from the source to find our evidence. Right. It said this move prompted a need. It prompted a need for a cohesive or unified military response amongst communist nations. When West Germany was allowed to rearm under the control of the capitalists, it was a threat now to East Germany, and it prompted them to have a need for a cohesive or unified military response amongst the communist nations. They were supposed also to make a collective effort to defend themselves, given that West Germany had rearmed. Right, that is our last question number 1.54. We are now going to our high order question, which is our source-based, our paragraph question. Right, I'll highlight how we are supposed to answer that question, and then you pick the source of a piece of evidence in the different sources. Right, the question is saying, using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of about 8 lines, which is about 80 words, explaining how the North Atlantic Treaty and the Warsaw Pact intensified the Cold War between USA and the Soviet Union. So we are supposed to answer our paragraph in full format. We want a point, which is an answer to the question, and then we want our explanation, and then we want our evidence, and then we want to link back to the answer or to the question. We are saying how, explaining how the two intensified Cold War. So we can say the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty and the Warsaw Pact, it formalized the division of Europe. Into two hostile camps. And it transformed regional disputes into global crisis. That can be a possible response. How did it intensify? Because it formalized the divisions. Divisions were now formal. Countries were belonging to one of the two, which means that Europe was divided formally. And the division also was not a division which was ordinary. It was a division which was hostile. There were two hostile camps. Why were those two defense alliances formed? They were meant to cover up for each of the member countries who have been attacked. So it means they were hostile camps. That further widened the rift. And also it transformed European disputes into global crisis. Right. Then you explain. Like in your explanation, we can say the formation of the two, it fueled arms race. It established rigid military spheres. Of influence. It ensured that conflicts involving a member could lead to direct confrontation. Direct confrontation between USSR and USA. So you are trying to give substance to the fact that the formation of NATO and Warsaw Pact, it formalized the divisions of Europe into two hostile camps. How was it? It led to the effect that if there was conflict between any one of the member countries, it could end up being a direct confrontation between the leading superpowers, which is the USA and the USSR. Then you now go to your sources and find supporting evidence in the different sources. You are now trying to substantiate what you were saying in the first line of your argument or your answer by finding supporting evidence in the different sources. And remember, you're supposed to use only relevant evidence to support your line of argument in the question, to support your theme of the answer to the question. Like, you can demonstrate some pieces of evidence. Like here we are seeing countries that had joined the North Atlantic Treaty to defend each other, as represented in the cartoon, and also countries who were willing to join so as that they can be part of the defense alliance. And also you can go to the next source, which talks about the North Atlantic Treaty requirements for countries to follow and how they must conduct themselves. You pick some evidence there to support that it was a commitment by countries that whatever was going to happen on one of them, they were also supposed to defend each other. You also look at the principles of trying to maintain peace. And you also go and look at some piece of evidence on the other side. Like you look at how Russia was influential in trying to influence other countries in forming the treaty to defend themselves on their side of communism. Then you can also look at the last source. You pick relevant evidence there. Then when you come to the end of your discussion, then you are supposed to provide a linking statement, which is summing up your paragraph and relating back to the question to show that whatever you were saying in the paragraph is answering the question. So here you are citing your evidence and you put your source in brackets at the end of the statement. You have to paraphrase this statement. Don't copy it as it is from the source. You just have to pick the idea and you put the idea in the source reference in the brackets at the end of the statement. And then you also provide a link. How is this answering the question? That is your last statement. Right, that takes us to the end of question number 1. We move on to question number 2, which is independent Africa. We are looking at a case study for Angola. Right, our question is saying, why did the Soviet Union support the popular movement for the liberation of Angola, the MPLA, in the Angolan Civil War from 1975? We are looking at the reasons why Russia was supporting the MPLA in the conflict in Angola from 1975. Right, without wasting much time, let's go to our questions. Number 211. According to the source, why was communism of a particular concern in Europe during the 1920s? That is an extraction question. We just have to pick our response from the source. It says the fear was that communism would spread to other African countries like wildfire. That is why communism was a threat. So we are saying our extraction, it says the fear was that communism would spread to other African countries like wildfire. That was the concern. Then it says, comment on the implication of the words. Angola was a perfect storm for a proxy war in the context of the civil war in Angola. Angola was a perfect storm, for a proxy war. What is the implication there? The implication, we can say, a war was most probable. to break out in Angola amongst the superpowers. In this sense, we are saying because of the interaction that was happening between the competing superpowers in Angola and their conduct in Angola, there were high chances that Angola was going to become a proxy ground for the war. It was going to be the ground that would facilitate the harmful effect of the war. And hence it was going to be a destructive war on Angola. So Angola was a perfect storm for a proxy war. A proxy war, we are saying, it's a war which is fought by some countries, mainly the superpowers, in another country. So in Angola, it is probable, it was most probable that the outbreak of the war was going to be realized in Angola because the superpowers were now having direct confrontation in Angola, trying to influence the liberation movements of Angola. Then it says, name the following role players in the source who were fighting for control over Angola. Right, who was fighting for the control of Angola? Any two foreign countries. The foreign countries who were fighting for the control of Angola are listed in the source. We are seeing not only was the US getting involved in Angola, so number one is the US. So was the Soviet Union, number two, Cuba, with Portugal, with South Africa, with China, and also Zaire. So all those countries, they were ultimately advocating for the control of Angola. They were in favor of the control of Angola. So all those many countries from USA to the USSR to also Cuba to the Portuguese, South Africa, and China, inclusive of the neighboring Zaire. Right. Any two liberation movements, we understand there were three liberation movements there in Angola. The first one, which is being the FNLA, which was supported by communists, and we had the MPLA initially, who was supported by the communists, and FNLA was supported by the capitalists, and also UNITA, which was also supported by the capitalists, inclusive of South Africa. Right. Explain why you think the Soviet communist agenda in Angola could not be considered legitimate. Right. Why we think that if we get a clue from the source, why would we say it was not legitimate support? Right. If we see here, it says, the Soviet Union's actions seemed to show complete disregard of their communist agenda, as they did not seem to care about the political ideology of the MPLA. So if we see there, if they are not caring about the political ideology, which is conforming to their own of a revolutionary organization in Angola, and then what else are they looking for? It means it was illegitimate because of the fact that they did not seem to care about the political ideology of the MPLA. They seem not to care about the political ideology. By the MPLA ideology. If it was by ideology that they were supporting the MPLA, they could have gone further to forward their ideology than focusing on other things. So we can also say in this instance, the Soviet Union, they were interested in Angola resources. They were interested in Angolan resources, and control of the ports. More than fighting for ideology. If we look at it from an open perspective, there is no reason why a country can spend a lot of money fighting for the forwarding of its ideology without any return. You fight for the spread of communism, and then what are you going to benefit? It means they had a hidden agenda. They were fighting indirectly for the Angolan resources and also to try and get access to the control of the ports of Angola. Right. Then you take it to question number 2.2, consult source 2b, who, according to the source, was a member of the Soviet Communist Party Politburo and chairman of the Party Control Commission. That is an extraction question. We just have to get the answer from the source. We have Arvid Pelsch. So our response for the first question is Arvid Pelsch. Right. Define the term independence in your own words. We can define independence openly as freedom from control by an external force. That is freedom from control by an external force. You are independent. No one from outside is influencing your decision making. Then you are independent. Name any two forms of Soviet military aid in the source that were given to MPLA. We are looking at Soviet military aid, the forms of Soviet military aid. Let's look at them from the source. Right. It says immediately after Angolan independence, the Soviet Union massively increased its military aid to the MPLA. Some estimates of Soviet aid to the MPLA for the liberation of Angola exceeded $300 million. So we are also seeing that they provided financial assistance of about 300 million, which is exceed 300 million. And then we are also seeing that besides the supply of the financial aid to Angola, besides the forms the finance, they also supplied the military equipment. So it's military aid, monetary military aid, and also military equipment. If you check, we have all those forms of military equipment which were supplied, like the anti-aircraft guns, the 120 millimeter, the 144 artillery, the 122 millimeter rockets, all those forms. But in this instance, the question says, identify any two forms of military aid. So it's financial aid on one side, and then they provided military equipment. And the different military equipments are the ones which are listed there. But we want forms. Our question is saying forms of Soviet military aid. So it's financial aid and also military equipment. Right. So 224, explain why the Portuguese High Commissioner was convinced that if he could not hand over power to 2 or 3 of the Angolan movements, he would just get on the plane and leave. Explain why it was like that. Right, the issue which we are seeing there is the main issue was that the Angolan dispute the transition to independence Was a difficult task for Portugal. The transition from colonialism to independence for Angola, it was a difficult transition, and hence Portugal could not handle it properly. They even failed to do a perfect transition. That is why they ended up even calling out for the Alpha Agreement, which also failed. So it means if he is saying he was convinced that if he could not hand over power to two or three of the Angolan movements, he would just get on plane, which means it was a difficult task for them to decide who was supposed to lead Angola. That is why now they were opting to give power to two or three, and hence it was not feasible to give power to two for liberation movements which are opposing each other, or to give to the three of them. They would still continue to fight for who was supposed to establish the formal government, the legitimate government of Angola. So we can also uh, look at it from the dimension of the dispute in Angola. The dispute was difficult to resolve, and hence they were supposed to leave Angola to its own determination. By the way, when he is saying he would just get on the plane and leave, it means he was to leave the situation as it was, which means it was very difficult for them to decide on who was supposed to lead and also to resolve the conflict between the three competing liberation movements. And hence, by leaving, he is saying he's going to leave Angola to its own determination to decide on its future on its own, because Portugal would have failed to do that. Comment on the implication of the phrase. To the Kremlin, the MPLA remained the vanguard and the leader of the Angolan people in the context of Soviet Union's involvement in Angola. In this instance, we are saying the USSR was assured that their support to MPLA was worth it, as it was the leading movement. So in other words, you are saying, when they are saying to the Kremlin, they are referring to their fortress, their government, their residents of their governments in Russia. They are saying to the Kremlin, the MPLA remained the vanguard and the leader of the Angolan people. So it means that the USSR is assured that whatever it's doing there is worth it, because the movement that is supporting is the one which is leading. And also it's the one which has got potential of forming the national government for the independent Angola. Right. Then number 2.3, comment on the symbolic representation of the military tank in the cartoon. Comment on the symbolic representation of the military tank in the cartoon. Right. If we check there, we see our source. There is a military tank that we see there, and we are seeing these two gentlemen, Fidel Castro of Cuba and Brezhnev of the Soviet Union. Right. So what is the implication of this tank there? We can say number one, that tank there is there to show that USSR gave military support to the MPLA, or it can mean that the USSR provided heavy artillery. Not only military equipment, ordinary military equipment, but heavy. Or we can also say it's an indication that the MPLA got the strongest military support. You can also look at it from that perspective. Right, those are the perspectives, but not limited only to those ones. Explain the historical significance of depicting Castro and Brezhnev standing next to each other. Ultimately, the significance there is to show mutual support or to show the unity of the Marxists. Or basically, you can also show that both supported MPLA. So basically, it means they were working together, standing next to each other. It shows mutual support. They were supporting each other. And also it shows the unit that they had as Marxist organizations, Marxist political ideologists, and also to show that both of them, they were in support of the MPLA as an political movement in Angola. Then we look on question number 2.4. Refer to sources 2B and source 2C. Explain how the information in source 2B supports the evidence in source 2C regarding the role played by Soviet Union in Angola. Right, I will still use the simple format for comparison, though you must know that when you are doing a comparison, you must follow the right format. I will just do it for the sake of making an illustration and also for the sake of using our time effectively. Right, we are comparing source 2B to source 2C. But if you look at source 2B, basically it talks about the Union massively increasing its military aid to MPLA. There is our idea that we want to compare. The Soviet Union massively increased its military aid to MPLA. Right? So we want to see how that idea is also portrayed, increasing military aid. And also we are seeing one of the military equipments that were supplied. So those two ideas are supporting each other. So we're saying USSR increased military aid to the MPLA. And how is it supported? Supported by a tanker, which is a heavy one. Shown on the source. We are seeing how those two ideas. Then if you also check, it talks also about here where it says, it talks about the MPLA controlled ports and airports aboard, which brought they were brought on Cuban and Soviet vessels. So it talks about those military equipments that were shipped into Angola. They were shipped via the Cuban and the Soviet vessels. So how is that supported in the visual source? It talks about Cuban and Soviet vessels, which is supported by Cuban and Soviet leaders standing together. So we are saying Cuban and Soviet vessels, they are the ones that shipped military equipment, which shows that the Cubans and the Soviets were working together. It's also supported by the two leaders who are standing together. It shows that they were mutually working in the support of each other. And then you can find any other ideas that you can compare there between those two sources to show the similarity of the two sources. We move on to question 2.5. 251, give 3 reasons stated in the source why the Cuban occupation of Angola was destructive. Right, that is an extraction question. Our answer, we find it in the source. We are now at source 1C. Right. The Cuban occupation of Angola has been profoundly destructive in our country. It has thwarted or prevented or hindered progress and the triumph of democracy. It has imposed on Angola a regime of a lonely, unpopular Soviet clique or a group. And also it has paralyzed the productive forces and destroyed the economy of the country. It is perpetrating war, violence, and bloodshed. It has demanded of the Angolan people a price that is extraordinarily high for their liberty, dignity, and national independence. It has been promoting disunity amongst the people. So if you check all those ideas, they are basically explaining the negative implication of the Soviet occupation of Angola. Number one, it has prevented or hindered progress, the triumph of democracy, meaning to say communist ideas are preventing Angola from achieving the main goal of democracy. Number two, it has imposed on Angola a regime of lonely and unpopular Soviet clique, which means it is now imposing an unfair government on Angola, which is unpopular and which is a lonely government. It has paralyzed productive forces and destroyed the economy of the country, meaning to say production was also affected because of the interference by the USSR. It is perpetrating war, violence, and bloodshed, which means continued fighting in Angola is being promoted by the Cuban Soviet occupation. And we are also looking at the Angolan people have to pay a price which is extraordinarily high for their liberty and dignity and national independence. And it has promoted disunity amongst the people. That is question number 151. We'll look at question number 152. Explain the concept propaganda campaign. What is a propaganda campaign? Right. We can say a propaganda campaign is an operation to spread misleading information and falsehoods to justify imperialistic tendencies. Right. So when I explaining the concept of propaganda campaign in the context of Soviet Union's expansionist policy, we are saying the Soviet Union is using propaganda to mislead people as to its intentions in its policy of extending into other countries. Why is it getting involved in Angola? It's hiding the main idea of involvement in Angola. But the main idea there is imperialistic idea. But we are seeing that they want to fool the people by telling them lies and telling them misleading information. So when it's a propaganda campaign, we are now saying it's an operation to spread misleading information and falsehood so as to justify its imperialistic tendencies. What it targets to achieve is not what it tells the people. It tells the people a different image, but at the end of the day, they are hiding behind their main theme of intervening in other countries. Right, then next question says, why do you think the Soviet-Cuban occupation of Angola would make Angola's task of national reconstruction difficult? Right, if we check them, in the source, you can find also there's supporting evidence which can guarantee us a response. It seeded bitterness amongst the nationalist movements. Or amongst the ethnic groups. Right, for that reason, we are saying the Soviet-Cuban occupation of Angola, it will make it difficult for Angola to reconstruct in future. Why? Because of the bitterness that was seeded by their involvement in the politics of the country. They are fueling fighting, they are fueling bloodshed, they are fueling chaos in the country, and the chaos is happening amongst people of the same nation. And at the end of the day, the people will develop bitterness against each other and they will continue fighting, which is going to hinder the progress of the country in the future because of the long-lasting bitterness that has been seeded amongst the people as a result of the intervention of Soviet Union and Cuba. Right, we take it to next question number 254. Comment on the limitations of the source for a historian researching UNITA's responses to the Soviet-Cuban occupation. When we are looking at limitations, we are saying, what does the source provide us, which we were supposed to have, or the source is not providing us an accurate image? So the limitations there, we can say the source is biased. Why is it biased? It only talks about UNITA's perspective. So for that sake, we can say that source is biased. And also we can say it has propaganda. It's a propaganda source. It's not an informative source. Where do we get the propaganda? It is meant to tarnish. Soviet-Cuban intervention. It's also propaganda in the sense that whatever it is saying there is meant to tarnish the image of the Soviet Union and Cuba as they intervened in the politics of Angola. And also, it ignores the negative role of capitalists. It only talks about the bad of the intervention of Cuba and USSR, but it also ignores that the USA was also fueling hatred amongst the people of Angola. It was also seeding bitterness. It was also promoting bloodshed and fighting, but it ignores all that, so it's limited. Or also, if we look at the language, it also has emotive language there, like where it says the Soviet socialist imperialists, labeling the Soviet Union and Cuba as imperialists. Right, so those are the limitations. Using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge. Write a paragraph of about 8 lines explaining why the Soviet Union supported the MPLA. So in your response, you can say your point Soviet Union supported the MPLA because of political and economic reasons. That can be your answer. It supported the MPLA because of political and economic reasons. You explain what were the political reasons. Both were Marxist organizations, or they follow the Marxist ideology. The Cubans, the Russians and the MPLA, they were following Marxist ideology. They were Marxists, they were pro-Marxist formations. So for that sake, they were sharing the same ideology. That is why they opted to support the MPLA. And also, if you check, you can say for economic reasons, the MPLA controlled the vast resources, the majority of the resources, or the greater share. The greater share of Angolan resources. For example, oil, minerals, and the ports of entry and airports. Much of them were controlled by the MPLA. So it was an economic benefit for the Soviet Union. Then you now go to your evidence. Extract relevant information from the sources. Source 2A, if it's source 2A, which supports the reasons for the support of the the Soviet Union to the MPLA. And then lastly, you link back to your question to show that whatever you were saying in the paragraph was answering the question. That is basically how you answer the paragraph question. Right, we move on to question number 3. Question number 3, our question focus is, what experiences did Elizabeth Eckford face during an attempt to desegregate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957? Right, without wasting much of our time, we go to the questions. Our first question is saying, according to the source, how was education declared a principal instrument of the life of a child? Name any two. Why was education declared a principal instrument of the life of a child? Right, if we check from our source, we can find out evidence. Right, it says today, it, referring to education, is a principal instrument in awakening the child to cultural values, in preparing him for later professional training, and in helping him to adjust normally to his environment. So number 1 is preparing him for later professional training. With education, we are training the child to prepare them for later professional training, and also in helping him to adjust normally to his environment. Right, so those are the responses for the first question. We move on to the second question. Why, according to the source, would it be difficult for a child to succeed in life? Again, it's extraction. In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity, where the state has undertaken to provide it, it is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. So our question is saying, why, according to the source, would it be doubtful to a child, for a child to succeed in a life? Why, according to the source, would it be doubtful? It would be doubtful for a child to succeed It is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied the opportunity of an education. Which means the child, if they are denied, their chances of success or being successful in life, they are very low because of that denial. So if he is denied the opportunity of an education, then the chances will be very slim. Define the term segregation in your own words. Segregation, we can define it simply as forceful separation of people in their lives based on their race. That can be a definition of segregation. We are saying it's forceful separation of people in their daily lives based on their race. We don't want people of different races to mix, and we don't want them to use the same facility. We separate them. Comment on why separating black children from others of similar age in a school might have generated a feeling of inferiority in the context of school segregation. Right, this issue of segregating black children from others, they could have developed a sense of inferiority in the sense that it negatively affected their self-confidence. The self-confidence is lost, and hence they will inherit a feeling of inferiority because they are separated from the main group. Then they will lose confidence or they will lose their pride, and then automatically a sense of inferiority will replace the confidence which has been lost. Explain the reliability of this source for a historian studying desegregation in schools. Right, we are looking at reliability. We are saying, can we trust the source? Yes, we can trust that it's a reliable source because it's a United States Supreme Court ruling. So it's reliable for the sake that it's a source which is coming from a Supreme Court ruling. And also, this extract is of 1954, which was during the time of segregation. And also we can rely on this because it talks about the 14th Amendment, which is a known law. It's a common law which is known, the 14th Amendment. Right, so basically we can rely on that based on those and other aspects. Name the group of students in the source that attempted to attend the Central High School because of desegregation. What was the group of the students? They were called the Little Rock Nine. The Little Rock Nine. The Little Rock Nine. Give any two reasons in the source why Elizabeth Exford was attracted to Central High School. Why was she attracted to Central High School? We can get that from the source. Right. I expected that there may be something more available to me at Central High School that was not available at Denver. That there might be more courses I could pursue, and that there were more options available. So basically the idea here is she thought that there was something more available to her, which was not available at her school. that there might be more courses that she could pursue, and also that there were more options that were available for her. Right. Why do you think it is important for Daisy Bates to arrange for some ministers to accompany the Little Rock 9 students as a group to Central High School? We are looking at religious ministers here to accompany the children. Right, we can say it was a way of demonstrating unity. Demonstrating unity. And also we can look at it from a religious perspective or to highlight moral grounds. To show that segregation was not a good practice on moral grounds, and hence we use the religious leaders. And also we can say for physical protection, because those children were at harm from the protesters, so they needed to be physically protected. Can also be another reason for physical protection or to ensure the safety of the children. Right. Comment on why you think Elizabeth Eckford felt that the screaming of people sounded like a mob to her. The screaming of the people sounded like a mob to her. Right. It was like a mob to her in her ears. Mainly because the people were angry. She felt she was going to be attacked. The crowd which was demonstrating was angry, and hence he felt like she was being attacked. And if you also check, according to her experiences, she was ultimately terrified. She was tormented by the experience. So she felt like she was going to be attacked. In another dimension, she was feeling like those people wanted to attack her. And they were actually angry at her when she had an encounter of being barred from entering the school. Right, number 331, explain the significance of the following in the photograph in the context of Elizabeth Eckford's experience on the first day at Central High School. Right, we are looking at it from the perspective of this of Elizabeth Eckford and also of the president of Arkansas National Guard and also the president of the media. What is the significance of such? Elizabeth sitting at the bus stop. The significance there, we can say it was there to show that she was tormented. By the experience. There is an element of her being tormented by the experience there. The experience was not good for her. And also we can look at it to show her composed. But terror-stricken. She was composed, but she was terror-stricken in the same sense. The way she was seated at the bus stop, it actually shows that she was someone who was almost getting out of her mind from the experience that she faced. So we can actually see that she was a tormented soul from the experience that she has just encountered. But she looks so composed as you are seeing there. Right. Then also the presence of the Arkansas National Guard. We are seeing the National Guard being present also. These guys in helmets. What is the significance of their presence there? We can say their presence there is to show that there was law enforcement. Or we can look at it from the perspective of for law and order, to avoid any incidents of violence amongst the protesters. Right, and also you can see the presence of the media. What can we say on the presence of the media? Basically, you can say the media there was to provide coverage to inform the public. And to educate them about the issue of segregation and desegregation. The media was supposed to provide coverage and was supposed to give information to the public and also to give education. Comment on why people were captured behind Elizabeth Exford as bystanders. Why were they captured there? I can say they were just captured there as passive elements. As passive elements of the environment. Or as unintended witnesses to the event. They are just passive elements. They are bystanders. They have nothing to do with what is happening there. They are passive elements of the environment, or they are unintended witnesses to the event. Right, we look at question number 3.4. Refer to source 3b and source 3c. Explain how the information in source 3b supports the evidence in source 3c regarding the experiences that Elizabeth Eckford faced when she wanted to enter Central High School. Right, we can compare those two sources again using our same format. We are comparing source A, source 3A, and source 3C. The ideas that we use there, we can say in source 3A talks about the Arkansas National Guards. Who were called, and also the guards in source 3C are shown in their uniform. Its comparison, we can see the two. And also it talks about the crowd behind Elizabeth. It explains how the crowd was behind Elizabeth. And also in the source C, we see some people behind her, but now are standing as bystanders, shown on photo. And also we see that Elizabeth Eckford, after she was barred from the school, she had to get to the bus stop. For safety. From the school entrance, she had to get to the bus stop for safety. That was her only way to get safety, so that she would get into the bus. And we are also seeing Elizabeth seated at the bus stop. Right, that's basically the idea that we need to look at there. Right. The next question says, what, according to the source, motivated people to turn Elizabeth Eckford away from the school on her first day? Give 3 responses. This is an extraction question. We want to look at why people turned her away. Right, she was turned away by people who were afraid of change. People who were afraid of change, and also people who were instructed by ignorance. and also people who were hating what they simply could not understand. So these are our three responses: people who were afraid of change, people instructed by ignorance, and people who hated what they simply could not understand. Then number 352, explain the concept constitutional rights. What we call the constitutional rights. When we're looking at the constitution in simple understanding, we are saying a constitution is a body of laws that are said to be used to govern the country. So when we are saying constitutional rights in this instance, we are now looking at the rights as in universal freedoms, which are enshrined into the body of the law. So we can say constitutional rights, they are basic protections and freedoms. Basic protections and freedoms that a country's constitution guarantees to people. Right, so basically those are basic protections and freedoms that are guaranteed in the country's constitution, which is a legal document which stipulates the laws that govern a country. That is our constitution. So if those freedoms and those protections are enshrined in that body of laws, then they are constitutional rights. Right. What did Clinton imply by the statement? 40 years later, we know that there are still more doors to be opened in the context of ending segregation in the USA. There are still more doors to be opened in the context of ending segregation. It means they still needed to do more for the sake of the Black Americans. So when they said they still need to do to open more doors, there were still more doors to be opened 40 years later. It's still that they were still need to do more for the sake of the Black Americans. They were disadvantaged, they were segregated, and there's need to correct that, and there's need to rectify the issue of segregation, which was supposed to be addressed as a long-term concern. Then number 354. Name any two organizations in the source who came to America to redeem the promise of America. The two organizations, we find them in the last part. It says, 40 years later, we know the question of race is more complex and more important than ever, embracing no longer just blacks and whites or blacks and whites and Hispanics and Native Americans, but now people from all parts of the earth coming here to redeem the promise of America. So we're looking at the Hispanics and Native Americans. Right. We are seeing that we're supposed to answer the paragraph question, which says, explain the experiences of Elizabeth Eckford. Explaining the experiences. So we want to figure out an answer which gives us a picture of the experiences. What kind of experiences? So we can say Elizabeth Eckford faced a terrifying, it was frightening, violent, mob alone while trying to enter Central High School. Right, then you go on to explain. What you explained there, you are now supporting how terrifying it was and how she got to attempt to enter the school alone. The issue which was there was, in your explanation, it was due to not having a telephone. She could not organize herself and get through, combine with others to get into the school. She missed the message. And hence, she got to encounter a situation where she was supposed to enter Central High School alone. And then she was exposed to racist elements. She was exposed to racist elements as she was trying to enter the school. And you also talk of, now, if you are looking at your evidence, you can talk of the Arkansas guards who blocked her. You quote the evidence, you look at the angry mob behind her, you quote your source. You also look at her rushing to the bus stop for safety. She had to rush to the bus stop for safety. You quote the source, and hence you link back to the line of argument to show that it was a terrifying experience that she faced in an attempt to attain desegregation. That takes us to the end of section A. We now quickly move on to our section B, which are our essay questions. And we are going to just highlight on how you are supposed to answer those questions. Basically, the content remains the same, but I'm going to guide you on the approach to the questions, how you should address the line of argument of the question, and also how you must create your introduction, which is contextualized, and how you must go around trying to attempt the line of argument and maintain the line of argument in the discussion until it reaches the end of the essay. Right. The first question is Independent Africa. Mobutu Sese Seko introduced only political changes to the newly independent Congo in 1960s. Do you agree with this statement? It's saying Mobutu only political changes. He introduced only. So our question is, do you agree with the statement? Do we have to agree with the statement that Mobutu introduced only political changes? We must disagree with this statement because we know Mobutu did not only introduce political, he introduced political, he introduced social, and he also introduced economic changes to the economy of Congo. So we tend to disagree with this statement. So in our introduction, as usual, remember when you're writing, this is question 4, which is Congo. When you're writing this, you need to adopt a line of argument which you can be able to support. So in this instance, we are saying in our answer, in disagreement, we disagree with the statement. Mobutu did not only introduce political changes. Rather, he introduced also economic and social changes. Right. That is our answer. Then we go on to our reasons. Why are we saying he did not introduce only political, but rather he introduced also social? Mobutu introduced policies such as nationalization. If you look at nationalization as a policy, we can say this is an economic policy, not a social policy, like what the question is suggesting us to take that line of argument of only Mobutu taking taking only the side of political movement, of political changes. We are looking at it as Mobutu taking economic changes, like him taking nationalization as an economic policy. Or we can also look at Mobutu introducing Zairinization, which is also an economic policy. And also, if you can look at it, we can look at the issue of Mobutu having also some social changes that he introduced amongst the people of Congo. He also introduced the policy of authenticide, which is a social policy. Then we elaborate. This essay will further explain on the policies that were introduced by Mobutu in independent Congo. Right, that is your question number 5. Unfortunately, I was saying question number 4. This is question number 5. Right, so if you contextualize your introduction like this, then it means you are now able to defend your line of argument. You now have to explain your points. Your points are common. You focus on the main points of the essay, which are always the same. When you are looking at it from the perspective of the political policies, you look at it from the side of the social policies, you look at it from the side of the economic policies. You address aspects just in passing, just to make a list of what you must address. You address political policies like the issue of political instability, how he handled political instability is political. You look at how he also handled the issue of Mobutuism, which was a personal cult. You also look at the creation of one-party state. Then you also look at his view of democracy. You can also look at the policy of kleptocracy, which can be political or economic at the same time. You also look at other aspects like the support from the USA, him as an anti-communist, his approach as an anti-communist. You also look at other aspects like how he handled the Katanga rebellion. Then all these are political policies. Then you go on to look at economic policies. Then you address issues like inheriting a capitalist economy and how he handled it. Then you also look at other aspects like his policy of Zairinization and its implication, and also you link it to show that it was not a political policy. And also you look at the policies like the policy of retrocession. After nationalization, you look at retrocession, and also you look at other policies like nationalization without compensation. All those are the ideas that you can use for the essay section. You are trying to link to show that it was not only political. You also look at his failures like the dependence on aid, on multilateral institutions like the IMF, and the failure of the economy. Then you also look to go and look at social policies. You look at policies like elitism. You look at also aspects like French as a medium of instruction. You also look at other aspects, like you look at how he changed the clothing and how he impacted on the people through change of clothing. And also, you also address other issues like what he did to education and non-payment of workers, and also the poor service delivery. You also look at other policies like the authenticite. All those are the points that you can use for the essay. Then you tie up your argument with a relevant conclusion. Right, then also we need to look at question number 4. We had looked at question number 5. The question number 4 is saying, to what extent the United States military dominance was rendered ineffective? To what extent was the US military dominance rendered ineffective? We know that the US was defeated by the Viet Cong. So it means its military dominance was rendered ineffective. So it means to a greater extent. We want to show the extent. So we are saying in our response, to a greater extent, the military dominance was rendered ineffective. That is question number 4. So our answer is to a greater extent. The US dominance was rendered ineffective. By the Viet Cong strategies. Right, that is our line of argument. Then we need to find reasons to support our line of argument. We now give general reasons. We are saying the USA over-relied on conventional. They over-relied on conventional warfare. For example, the Operation Rolling Thunder, which proved ineffective. At the hands of non-conventional methods. Non-conventional guerrilla methods. By the Viet Cong. We've given the reason why we are saying the methods were rendered ineffective. Then we give an elaboration. What is the essay about? This essay is going to further explain on the tactics that were used by the USA and the Viet guerrillas in the Viet Cong War, in the Vietnam War. That is your elaboration. Then you now go on to highlight on the military tactics and strategies that were used by the two sides. We are looking at it from the perspective of the Americans, and when you are linking it, make sure that you link it in such a way that the tactics of America prove ineffective and the tactics of the USA prove effective. So you can look at the American side. You can look at policies like the safe village as a point. You can also explain on young and inexperienced soldiers for the side of the Americans. You can also look at it on the side of the My Lai massacre. You look at Operation Rolling Thunder. You also look at other strategies like chemical warfare. You also look at other tactics like the range hand. Also look at other strategies like Rolling Thunder. We've talked about that. We've talked about chemical warfare. You look at also other strategies like the Tet Offensive. By the guerrillas. Then you also look on the side of the guerrillas at the same time. You need to look at hit and run tactics. You look at the tunnels by the guerrillas. You look at the use of Ho Chi Minh Trail. You look at also other aspects like support from USSR. You also look at USSR and China, and also North Vietnam. Then you also look at other strategies that were used by the guerrillas as they went through the war. They also got support from peasants. You can also talk about their geographical knowledge. You can also talk about camouflage. All these are the ideas that you use in the essay and you explain them in paragraphs. And then you come to the end of your discussion and you tie up your argument with a with a relevant conclusion. But also remember that you are linking your points in such a way that you show the ineffectiveness of the American strategies and you counter it with the effectiveness of the guerrilla tactics. Right. Then we come to our last question, which is the question on the Black Power movement. It says the Black Power movement adopted a radical approach in all its aspects in attempts to end discrimination. We are saying they adopted a radical approach, which means they were now no longer accepting anything besides a change. They wanted to attain a change in their way to freedom. So are we saying that is an approved statement, or we can disapprove the statement? Right. In this instance, we know that the Black Power movement was an advancement from the civil rights movement. It took a more radical approach. They wanted change. They wanted to end discrimination and segregation. That was their main purpose. So with this essay, we need to take a line of argument of approval. So which means we are saying the Black Power movement adopted a radical approach. Right. And then why are we saying so? We are saying so because it advocated for aspects like black self-reliance, which was a move towards change, or it advocated for black self-defense against police brutality. And also it enhanced the aspect of cultural pride of the black people. But this is a critical discussion. We must also look at it from the other side. However, some of the methods adopted by the BPM were not that radical. Then you also cite examples of the methods which are not radical, and then you give an elaboration. This essay is going to explain on the methods that were used by the Black Power movement to end discrimination and to end segregation. So that's your line of argument. It's a dual line of argument for a critical discussion. It must have two sides so that you have a critique in your presentation of the facts. So when you are now explaining your ideas, you are now explaining basically on the points of the philosophy that was followed by the Black Power movement. You look at a philosophy of self-reliance, philosophy of black pride. Explain on the philosophy of control of politics in their own communities. Right, you explain that as a philosophy. Then you also go on to look at the influence of the Black Panther Party in instituting self-defense against police brutality. You explain along those lines. You look at also self-reliance programs like feeding schemes. To eradicate hunger amongst the youth. It was also another move that were taken. Then you can also look at child care projects the Black Panther. You look at Black Panther Party, child care projects. And then you can also look at the Black Panther Party literacy projects. You also look at other aspects like the Black Panther Party patrols on streets to monitor police. Right, some of those ideas. You also look at the demand that history must be taught in schools. It was also another move that they advocated for history to be taught in schools. The concept of Black pride, which they encompassed in their philosophy to enhance the self-confidence of the Black person. Encouraging African Americans to stand for themselves. To be able to stand for themselves. If you look at also the issue of Carmichael, you look at what he advocated for, and also you look at the exclusion of white liberals. From the ideas. They wanted to exclude the white liberals as a philosophy of African Americans. And also, if you look at it, they also were against the USAC involvement. In Vietnam, they advocated for the withdrawal of the USAC involvement in the Vietnam War, which caused a lot of economic damage and also loss of lives of ordinary Americans. Right, so if you look at that, then basically those are the ideas that you use in this particular presentation to come out with an argument. And at the end, remember, you're supposed to tie up your argument. You go back to the question, you refer back to the question, and then you can reaffirm key points as a way of tying up your argument. Right, so basically that's the picture of the focus of this particular essay questions. What is most important for you there is to contextualize your question in your introduction so that whatever you say is in line with the demands of the question and is aligned to what the question has demanded or has commanded you to do. Right, with that being said and done, this marks the end of this our discussion, and I hope this discussion is going to assist you as those who will be writing in coming sessions, and also for those who have written, it can give you a picture of how best you would have scored in your June examinations for this particular session. With that being said and done, thank you for watching. We'll meet in other sessions to follow. Your host in history.